Russia, leave Ukraine or you reign now. Peace be with you too.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule.
Nos programmes offrent plusieurs langues. Veuillez visiter suprememastertv.com/schedule.
Nuestros programas ofrecen varios idiomas. Visiten suprememastertv.com/schedule.
Műsoraink sok nyelvet tartalmaznak. Kérjük, tekintse meg itt suprememastertv.com/schedule.
I think people are generally aware that bees are useful for us as pollinators, so we should conserve them. But for me, they're also creatures with fascinating alternative perceptual worlds, so wholly different minds.
The Mind of a Bee by Dr. Lars Chittka, Vegetarian, Part 2 of 2. Continue watching to find out more.
Vegan leader, true leader of all time.
When someone becomes vegan in St. Helena, locals might do a celebratory swing round, meaning dance in the St. Helenian patois. Luminescent viewers, I am Gillian. The St. Helenian residents wish you abundant inspiration and bliss from the divine. Welcome to The Mind of a Bee by Dr. Lars Chittka, Vegetarian, Part 2 of 2. Dr. Lars Chittka, Vegetarian, is a professor in sensory and behavioural ecology at Queen Mary University of London, UK. He studies the behaviour, sensory systems, intelligence, communication and psychology of bees. His book, The Mind of a Bee, published in 2022, is a rich and surprising exploration into the cognitive abilities of bees. Today we continue our interview with Dr. Chittka to learn more about his research.
The bigger levels of bee slavery and exploitation actually happen in the commercial pollination industry. The pollination of almonds in California is probably the most ruthless pollinator exploitation event anywhere in the world, where over 50% of all North American bees get packed on lorries, transported to California for just a few weeks, and they find a horizon-to-horizon environment of just almond flowers, which of course are sprayed with all kinds of chemicals, which in turn affect the bees and so on. And at the end of that, the bees get packed onto lorries again and shipped back all over the country. So not only is it a uniquely bad event to spread all kinds of diseases, but it also very literally often stresses the bees to death. And these commercial beekeepers will then complain, "Ooh, our bees are dying. Can you scientists please find a fix for that?" But it's the result of very poor standards in looking after the bees.
Dr. Chittka explains the main threats that bees face.
Pesticides, obviously. Again, we have to point our finger at industrialized agriculture here. Of course, to the extent that our food production is streamlined to be both mega productive and cheap. People spray tons of pesticides on every kind of plant and fruit and so on. And the idea there is to keep the fruits shiny and free from insect bites, and of course to minimize leaf damage and so on. But the collateral damage that of course happens along the way, that is not just herbivorous plant-eating insects are poisoned and killed, but also of course the pollinating bees. And that's even more so of course with the many wild pollinators out there that have no beekeepers to look after them. These are species that are entirely building their nests in the wild, and of course there's no one to monitor their health. There's no one to prop them up in case they're ailing and failing. And so these cocktails of pesticides that are used on a very grand scale on pretty much everything, all the vegetative food that we eat, are a major threat to bees. At the same time, just the scale of habitat loss is staggering in many countries, including in the UK. I mean, we've lost close to 100% of wild, unadulterated nature over the last century, and all of this to generate a surplus of food that actually we don't usually consume in its entirety. I mean, it seems that about 50% of the groceries that people buy end up in the bin because they don't eat them in time. And of course that has a price. It has a price that the agriculture that produces this is industrialized to such an extent that leaves very little room for bees to find wildflowers, to find habitats where they can build their nests and so on. Bees are a kind of canary in the coal mine because at least they are appreciated as having a high utility for us humans. But of course there are thousands of other insect species who suffer equally but with less monitoring. And so these are major threats. There is also a number of diseases that as a result of people shipping around bees, for example, for commercial pollination purposes around the globe, have brought diseases into areas where they weren't previously present and where the bees don't actually have any natural defenses against them. So again, that's a clearly human-made factor that affects the bees' health as well.
Vegan. Imagine how much joy you bring.
There are 211 countries and regions which have animal people protection laws.
Obey the law of your country. No more animal people slaughterhouses, no more hurting, no more murdering them to eat, to lab test, or for any reason at all. Be vegan, make peace, so be it.
Graceful viewers, let's thank the bees for all their hard work. We'll be right back here on Supreme Master Television.
Peace for Ukraine or Ukraine now. Russia, just go home.
Welcome back to The Mind of a Bee by Dr. Lars, Chittka, Vegetarian, Part 2 of 2. In 2019, Dr. Chittka released a collaborative album inspired by bees entitled Strange Flowers.
I published a kind of concept album some years ago, a music album where where the lyrics of all the songs are inspired one way or another by the world of bees or my research, others' research, and so on. And I guess the background for that is that, in my perception at least, there is a lot of poetry in the world of bees that, of course, we can't express in our scientific writings. These kinds of stories, you can write about them in a kind of dry manner, just pure scientific observations in scientific publications, but it also is a very powerful story, I think, that lends itself well to combine with music. So that's what we did with that album.
If your children killed or maimed in war, you'll be in anguish. Others' children are dying in your war. Stop it now.
Владимир Путин обращается к вам, дети Украины. Отзовите свои войска.
In the mind of a bee, Dr. Chittka shares an important message.
The work that we did in bees raises, I think, the perspective that there are many kinds of other minds out there in the animal kingdom, not just cute animals with that are worth cuddling, but actually very different perceptual worlds, very different minds with different priorities. I think it necessitates nature conservation from a completely different perspective. I think people are generally aware that bees are useful for us as pollinators, so we should conserve them. But for me, they're also creatures with fascinating alternative perceptual worlds, so wholly different minds.
There are 211 countries and regions which have animal people protection laws. Namibia is one of them. Namibia, Animals Protection Act 71 of 1962. Any person who commits acts of cruelty to animal people is guilty of an offense and liable to a fine or to imprisonment for up to 1 year without the option of a fine.
Obey the law of your country. No more animal people slaughterhouses. No more hurting. No more murdering them to eat, to lab test, or for any reason at all. Be vegan, make peace. So be it.
Over the last several decades, staggering amounts of land have been cleared to make grazing lands and grow food for the animal people livestock industry, resulting in biodiversity loss.
If you have the privilege to sit on an airplane occasionally, by and large it looks as if 99.5% is cornfields, strawberry fields, potato fields, and so on. And so I don't actually think we need further increases in the efficiency of our agriculture. There's enough food to go around. I mean, we occasionally still see sad news about famines in certain parts of the world, but I think this is largely a question of distribution, not one of there being a global shortage of food. Obesity is now a much bigger problem in many parts of the world. So it's an excess of food that's in a sense the bigger problem. And yes, to the extent that people can revert this trend and at least make some of the planet's surface available again for wild things to thrive, I think that can only be a good thing.
Dr. Chittka emphasizes that vegan organic farming is kind to the insects.
There are, of course, advocates of pesticide-free farming and people who practice that very successfully. Unfortunately, because of the way that agriculture is subsidized by the government, such produce is often more expensive, so it becomes a privilege for the relatively wealthier population to access such produce. So I think some of what needs to be done is that the government allocates its subsidies more differentially to produce that's ethically produced. I don't know if it completely mitigates the threat, but the more the merrier. So even if people reduce pesticide usage, even if people reduce the size of their fields, the extent to which there's just one crop growing year in, year out, every little helps. I think we don't have to look to any kind of highly modern, innovative, new forms of farming. We've all seen the kind of farming that you talk about 50 years ago as kids, when there still used to be a system of rotating different crops, of having relatively smaller fields, not the kinds of horizon-to-horizon cornfields that you see nowadays, meadows filled with flowers of a huge diversity that would be filled not just with bees, but with also a diversity of grasshoppers and butterflies and so on. When I was a kid 50 years ago, no one starved in Europe, to my knowledge. So there actually doesn't seem to be much need to increase productivity from that level. So we've had that kind of system that we dream about just a few decades ago, and all it takes is reactivating some of that historic knowledge, how to farm ethically with fewer pesticides and still be reasonably productive.
Our appreciation, Dr. Lars Chittka, for sharing these important insights gained from our remarkable bee co-inhabitants. We pray that people adopt natural, vegan, organic growing practices immediately and rid our planet of the many harmful toxins which are killing our planet and all life on Earth. For more information on The Mind of a Bee by Dr. Lars Chittka, vegetarian, please visit press.princeton.edu/books and search The Mind of a Bee.
One should not permit or consent to the killing of living beings. Then he will perhaps be delivered from all misery. Uttaradhyayana Sutra, Jainism.
Noble viewers, thank you for being with us. Up next on Supreme Master Television is Dairy Free Delight, a wonderful world of wellness with vegan yogurt. May your hearts be filled with the everlasting love of the divine.
Be vegan, make peace, do good deeds, hell not reach.
We pray for Ukraine or you reign.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule and suprememastertv.com/UL.
Nos programmes offrent plusieurs langues. Veuillez visiter suprememastertv.com/schedule et suprememastertv.com/UL.
Nuestros programas ofrecen varios idiomas. Visiten suprememastertv.com/schedule y suprememastertv.com/UL.
برامجنا متوفرة بالعديد من اللغات. يرجى زيارة suprememastertv.com/schedule و suprememastertv.com/UL.